Please note that in this show, you might hear graphic descriptions or language that may not be appropriate for everyone. Listener discretion advised.
He would be so happy about his tomatoes, his beefsteak early girl tomatoes. And I would look at them and roll my eyes and be like, I hate tomatoes. That's such a kick in the fucking nuts, isn't it?
Welcome to Parentless Podcast. I am your host, Stephanie Relaford. On the show, we're going to be speaking with others who have experienced the loss of one or both of their parents or parental figures. As we heard in episode 12 with Louisa Velarde, being parentless is like an island, and I don't know how to swim. Thank you for being my life jacket.
Hello, I'm Phil Banwartz. I am 51 years of age. I am a certified health coach, Reiki Master teacher.
Thank you so much for being here. Can you tell me, why are we here? Who was your person?
Sure, absolutely. So when you had reached out and wanting to know if anybody would like to be a part of this, I automatically had wanted to talk about my dad, who passed away January of 2000. He was 72 at the time. I was 30. And it's interesting because I had also just lost my mom just a year ago, just a little over a year ago, May of 2020. And we could certainly talk about her as well, but my connection with my dad, and not to say that my mom was not a good mom or good person, but my connection with my dad was just stronger, or it was just different. I don't know if that's because father-son, kind of thing. We shared the same interest with sports and, things like that, of that nature. But I just, in my head, I always thought I would talk about my dad. So he had been suffering some health-related issues throughout the years that led up to his death. And what happened was that he got pneumonia. And so it was really hard for him. His immune system was already pretty well compromised with health-related issues such as diabetes and cardiovascular, heart. He had a few heart attacks over his life, and it just really took a toll on his body. And again, he was feeling rather ill. And then when pneumonia got a hold of him, it was really hard to bounce back from that. I remember my family, my wife and our daughter, at the time we were in an apartment, we were getting ready to move into a home, and getting that call at like 2, 3 in the morning. And it was my mom. She was at the hospital, and it was like, Dad's an emergency. I think you should come, kind of thing. And he was at home, and the ambulance came, and they got him into the ambulance, got him to the hospital, but they were unable to resuscitate him. I think at that time he was passed. And so by the time I got there with my wife, and after her mom came over to watch the baby, because our daughter was only 6 months old at the time, he had already expired. He had passed. And so it was tough because you don't get a chance to say, goodbye at that time. And I know it's weird because, this happened like in 2000. And when I think about it, I still kind of get sad, and I still cry about it. But, that's me.
I think that's good that you're able to cry. So you said your dad had health problems. Do you remember how old you were, like when he had his first heart attack?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. So probably in my early 20s, because I remember the first time that he had a heart attack, he was actually out of town. My mom and he were in Colorado. They were attending a good friend's marriage or something was going on. And he had a heart attack. They were like in Vail. And I remember getting the call from my mom, and the place that I was working at the time was really great because they allowed me to take some time off, and I flew out to Colorado because I didn't know really what the situation was or like what was going on. And so I just wanted to be there. But yeah, it was a heart attack, and he recovered, bounced back from that. And he was such a strong person. To give you some background, to give you some history with my dad, he was born late 20s, right? He was a kid when the Depression hit, right? In the late 20s and the 30s. And his parents were, I don't know if I would say strict, probably not at that time, because he grew up on a farm, right? In Midwest Iowa, 9 other brothers and sisters. And life was hard, right? I mean, you woke up at the crack of dawn and you got your chores done, and then you went to school, and then you came home and you got your chores done. I couldn't even imagine, to be honest with you, living a life like that with such hard labor. And his dad was rather, and I never met, that would have been my grandfather then on my dad's side. I never met him, but I remember hearing stories from not only my dad, but my 2 older siblings, that he was really strict and really hard on the kids. And my dad decided to join the service, and this would have been around the World War II era, lied about his age, right, to join up in the Navy. He had a couple of older brothers that were already in the service. And so I don't know if it was, well, my brothers are in the service and this is what we do. You know, it's World War II. It was a lot different when you're signing up to go to war, because everybody was sort of like around you and they rally you and they support you. And yeah, we got to go to war, where it's a little bit different now with politics and, you know, opinions. And another thing is, I think he decided to join up because he wanted to get away from his dad, who was just really, really tough and hard. And I can't even imagine, let's see, I'd rather go to war than live at home. You know, to me, war would be horrible. That would be the last thing I would want. I think I'll just deal with, you know, the abuse or, you know, physical and verbal rather than go to war. But anyways, so he did that. And it's just that mentality of, this is what we did. This was our job. Of course, we're going to go to war. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to be a good soldier, to be a good order taker, whatever that looks like. And so he was in the Navy, and he was on a destroyer ship in the South Pacific when Pearl Harbor happened, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. When they came back, his duty, his job was cleanup. And so he had to deal with getting all of the bodies that were killed because of the attack and getting them ready, pulling them out of, if it was airplanes that were just getting ready to take off, that couldn't take off, if it was just in the water, and then just having that to deal with. And again, it just goes back to, that's what we did, you know, because I remember I would try to ask him to get, you know, more information about what was it like, you know, to be there, to be in that situation. And I remember him telling me, you know, I was like 17 or 18. It didn't faze me because that's just what I was told to do. And that's what we did. Looking back on it, if I was maybe older, it probably really would have messed me up. But he never really talked about it. And it's so typical for soldiers, you know, especially during World War II time, that's just what we did. You know, there was no, and I'm not saying that it's good to have that, like, well, this is just what we did, because I'm a firm believer in talking about stuff that is hard to deal with, and death is hard to deal with. And a lot of people, especially from that time, I don't want to burden anybody with my problems. Everybody's got a ton of shit that they're already dealing with. Why would I then also talk about something that they may feel like they need to take on? And it's just that Midwest mentality. It's, you know, I'm here for you, right, as a neighbor, because growing up in the Midwest, people need help. You know, the snow comes, they may need help getting groceries. They may need help getting their car started because it died overnight. But they don't want to ask for help themselves, if that makes sense. They love being there for people, but they don't want people helping them. This is kind of a weird mentality. Again, I don't know if that's because you grow up in the Midwest. I don't know if that's what was instilled in them as kids. And they just, follow that mantra, that, mentality.
Yeah, I would really think that, the depression would have a lot to do with that.
Yeah, they absolutely were different. And they had skills. They knew how to do stuff. They made clothes from flour sacks, and they just knew how to be resourceful with what was given to them, with what they had. They didn't have a lot, they didn't have anything. And it's just amazing, because here, we freak out when we lose Wi-Fi. It's like, oh my God, what do we do?
Yeah, so different. I'm sure your dad didn't just bring up these stories on his own, right? You said you asked him what it was like. And how old were you when you guys were talking about that?
Oh, sure. I remember as early as being in, grade school or high school, talking about, and it was probably because of having to do a report. When you start getting into classes where it talks about history, and then there are certain sections within that class. Now we're talking about war or World War II, things of that nature. And I thought, wow, what a great opportunity, because I can speak to someone who was there, who lived it, who experienced it. And again, it was so difficult to draw out any type of stories. I don't know if it's because he just didn't want to think about it, or that was just a long time ago. And, I lost a lot of good buddies, it was just, they just didn't talk, and it's just hard to, get a better understanding from a personal vantage of what really happened and what went on. And, I just remember, talking about something, and it was almost like, well, and that's just how it was. And then, okay, end of conversation.
The way that you like to talk about things, do you think that came from your dad's not talking about things?
Maybe. That's a really good question. Mom talked, right? She loved to talk. She loved to have conversations, even if they were just meaningless ramblings. It didn't matter. She really enjoyed talking. And so maybe I picked that up from my mom. Maybe it's picking it up from my wife as well, because we like to have really good conversations about things. Dad would, I guess it depended on the topic though, too, because we could talk sports, we could talk, cars. Not that I really knew a lot about working on cars or different types of cars, but my dad liked cars, and every once in a while he would talk about, I've always wanted to restore a 52 Chevy or, something like that. I'm like, well, why didn't you? Oh, well, you just didn't have time, or, things like that, but, he was, I guess, like I said, it depended on the topic, we would talk about stuff.
But you probably never sat around and talked about your feelings or things like that.
Oh, no. Right. That was, it's interesting, because again, back then in that type of era, that mentality, people didn't go to therapy, or if you did, you didn't talk about it. It's weird. It's like, I don't know if it's because it's a weakness, like, oh, I can't talk about having problems, or I can't say I'm depressed, because then, I can't cry. That's a weakness. And I'm not trying to take anything away from that. If you feel like you have responsibilities, and it goes back to sort of that like patriarchal, men have a certain job and women have a certain job, and men make the money, and men take care of the responsibilities, and men, you know what I mean? So it's like, I don't have time to get in touch with myself or my feelings. That's weird. So I'm not sure. And it's too bad too, because I would like to think that if people took the time to say, I don't feel good about something, or I'm having a tough time dealing with something, that they can learn from that, they can grow from that, and it actually makes them stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's what I like so much about this right now is that in the first 10 minutes you were tearing up and showing emotion and that type of thing. And that is just so good to be able to do in front of people. Like you said, your dad would probably have never cried. I don't know. Did you see your dad cry ever?
Yes, I do. Okay. And it's interesting too, because I think I remember him telling me at one time, I never really used to cry, but after my third heart attack, I seem to cry more. And it's weird because, again, he was so strong. I think in one of his heart attacks, he was with someone. They were in the car. He was driving and he goes, I can't remember who he was with, good friend. I think he went, I think I'm having a heart attack, and drove himself to the hospital. That's how strong he was. It was like, nah, I don't need any help. I'll just take myself. That was so him.
What was your dad's name?
Phil. I am a junior, so he and I share the same name.
Very good. That's nice. And you said you have a daughter, right? No sons?
That's correct. We have one daughter. Yeah.
Okay. So I suppose you didn't pass on Phil to your daughter.
Nope. No.
Did your dad have any phrases, jokes? Did he do dad jokes? Or maybe he wasn't the joking type. I don't know. But did he have anything that you just really remember him saying a lot to you?
I remember him saying, nobody said life was fair. And the world doesn't owe you anything. He would say those things. And I don't know if it's because he felt like I don't remember. Well, I mean, to be honest, to be fair, I think I remember saying things like, well, that just isn't fair if maybe I didn't do well on a test, or, the excuses come out where it's like, I didn't do well during a particular track meet or a soccer game, or, and saying, well, that's not fair because only if, coach would have put me in more, or if I had the chance to play more, then we would have won, or, something like that. Or it wasn't my fault that I didn't get that ground ball that was hit to me during the baseball game because, and you can come up with many excuses. And then I think my dad just wanted to make sure that I understood that, hey, nobody said life was fair. The world doesn't owe you anything. You got to get out there and you got to do the work. He was very cognizant on hard work equals reward, and I grew up in a time when things were, changing there. We didn't have, of course, cell phones at the time. There was no really big blow up of technology yet when I was growing up, and that would have been, late 70s and 80s. I went to high school between 84 and 88 is when I graduated. But things were starting to change as far as video games were coming out and everything was like, whoa, what is this? You could, schools were starting to open up about computers and then kind of early stages of coding and things like that. And it was like, oh, wow, what is all of this? It's really kind of futuristic and far out there, but kids are kind of doing some pretty cool things with, early stages of robotics. And it was like, maybe there's something you could say where it's like, I understand that hard work will pay off, but what about if we worked a little bit smarter and did things that not necessarily were so physical or backbreaking? And, he's coming from, it's construction and it builds the world, and we need more trades and we need more vocations and we need people to learn, skills and things like that. Because, he would think to himself, I don't know, I see these kids today and I worry. I think people have forgotten that hard work, is a staple and it builds character. And that's the only way that you're going to make it in life. But he also understood, the advantages of having a good education. And he wanted me to do well in school, and he wanted me to go to college, and he wanted me to take communications, and he wanted me to know how to type because he didn't want me to get stuck in where he was, where he had limited options, because he only went as far as the 8th grade, and then it was wartime, and it was, I got to work on the farm, and, there weren't very many opportunities. College was like, college, that's for rich kids. I can't go to college. I'm a farmer, but he did very well. I'm telling you, even for just an 8th grade education, he did very well. Mom didn't have to work. He made enough money where we lived comfortably. It's weird. It's like, I didn't have everything that I wanted, but I had everything that I needed,
Right.
Nobody said life would be fair. Trying to think of other things. The world doesn't owe you anything.
Well, those were questions that were not on my list, and you came up with those very, very quickly. So those are definitely ingrained in you. Do you ever use those with your daughter?
Oh, I'm sure that I have. But it's interesting because, raising a daughter, and of course, I never had any experience because I never had, like younger siblings. I didn't have, an opportunity, I don't think, to be around younger kids where, like, I never babysat. And so I didn't really know like what to expect being a father. They always say, yeah, there's no manual. But I think with raising our daughter, I don't really remember saying things like that. I don't know if it's because I hated hearing it. and when you're growing up and you see yourself being a parent, and you always tell yourself, I'm never going to be like my parents. My parents never let me do anything. When I'm going to be a parent, I'm going to be so cool. My kids are going to have everything they want, and they're going to be able to do anything they want. And then you realize but that's not healthy. And you understand when you grow up, like, oh, I get it. Now I know why my dad said stuff like that. Now I know why my dad would get upset about something that I couldn't understand why they would be so upset about. I would be thinking, okay, where are we going to go on summer vacation? Because we would always go places. Usually it was like up north, Pine Top, Flagstaff, and we'd go camping, or California because we had relatives in Disneyland. And I remember my dad getting upset one time thinking, well, why do we have to go anywhere? And I thought, whoa, that's kind of weird. But then you realize as you get older, there are way more stresses in life. Maybe my dad didn't have such a good year in income. Maybe there were setbacks. Maybe there were, some things that were going on that I didn't know about. And so the money wasn't there. But again, it goes back to, I didn't know because you're not telling me everything. You're not opening up. Had I known, maybe I would have been a little more sensitive to asking certain questions. But then you realize it's like, oh yeah, sometimes you can't go on vacation because you don't have the money. It's just interesting when I think about it, when I look back, like, why did my dad get so mad when I asked that particular question? And then you realize as you get older, a lot more responsibilities, there's bills to pay, somebody got sick, there's medical expenses. It's just, and you realize, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah, that's something that I really like to talk about. How old is your daughter?
She is 22, just turned 22.
Okay. So yeah, just the difference of like you said, the understanding that comes once you are a parent yourself. You said your daughter was 6 months when your dad passed away.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. And so I was happy that my dad got to meet her, right, before he passed. I wish that my daughter would have had more of a relationship with my dad, but it wasn't necessarily my dad's ultimate goal, I don't think, to pass away at such an early age that my daughter was. And I remember being mad, because I always envisioned that my dad and my daughter having that cool grandpa granddaughter relationship, and that didn't happen, and I remember thinking to myself, I wish my dad would have just taken better care of himself, like the foods that he ate. He didn't exercise. And I mean, it's always, as they say, hindsight is always 20/20. And it's always like, yeah, I wish I would have taken better care of myself. I wish I would have done that. Or I wish I would have done this. And I remember him being at a point in his life where he made a choice to diet and to slim down, because he wasn't, I don't say he was, well, he had the beer belly. Let's just put it that way. So he did have some extra weight that he would carry around. And I think that added to the additional stress on his body. And I do remember him, eating things like lean cuisine and being on a plan and stuff like that. And he looked really good. And I was like, wow, you have better, sort of like, you're getting around a lot better. You're able to do things that you couldn't do, and you look good, and you look like you have more energy. And then I don't know if it was just a situation where it was like, I'm just tired of eating the same stuff, and it's not really that good, and it's hard to stick to it. And it was just, he fell off the rails, and then just went back to, eating, different food that maybe he really shouldn't have been eating, and, and stuff like that. So, if he would have stayed with it, I think, and who knows, you can only speculate. Maybe he would have, had a few more years. Maybe it would have, been prolonged, with his life, but, you never know.
So I have to ask this now. Looking at you, you're very trim and healthy. You look like you work out. Is that like a conscious thing for you? Like, I need to be healthy. I need to do this for my family and my body.
Absolutely. That's a really good question, because I remember thinking to myself, when my dad had all of his health related issues, and again, we're talking about diabetes, he was in a position and a point in his life where he was blind in one eye. Now, he had like this macular degeneration. I'm sure that the diabetes didn't help, because we know that when you have been given a diagnosis and it's diabetes, that certain things happen and change in your life. You can lose your vision. You can lose limbs, right? You have to really be careful of what you eat, and your blood sugars, and they spike and then they drop, and then, and all of this. And I remember thinking to myself, along with the hypertension and the high cholesterol and the high blood pressure, my father died. I think his body was at a time and at a point where it's like, I give up. I can't fucking do this anymore. Pneumonia comes in. That's usually, okay, that's going to be it. Not to sound ghoulish, but that's the nail in the coffin. And by the time I got to the hospital, I couldn't say goodbye. And this person who was my dad, who's laying there, just so unhealthy, so done. And I remember telling my wife, I go, I'm not going out like that. There's no fucking way. And I'm not saying that I was at a point where I was overweight, I'm not doing the things. I felt like I always had a good relationship with sports. I loved sports. I played a lot of sports. I stayed active even before becoming a father, and then after having a child. You have to, maybe rearrange certain things in life, with the routines when you have kids. But I always tried to stay as active as possible by going running and, exercising and working out, and whatever that looks like, because I just didn't want to do it. I never wanted to put myself in a situation where my loved ones are going to have to take care of me, if that makes sense. Now, I know that there are so many things that could happen where I could be diagnosed with something, but we'll deal with that when that comes. I just want to be mindful of what I choose to eat and do is going to have consequences later on in life, because I want to have a really good relationship and a long relationship with my wife and my daughter and my friends, you know?
You're just playing the game of life.
I guess
this is your sport now.
That's a good way to look at it. Life is a sport.
But I mean, you're putting all the things in place, like you said, to better your family and yourself and have this long, good life as far as you can control. Yeah. So very good.
I used to say things like, well, I definitely want to see the Cubs win a World Series, right? See, my dad, he was a Cubs fan. I grew up in Phoenix, but to, educate individuals, Phoenix didn't have a baseball team until 98, I think was the inaugural year, something around there, like late 90s. So my dad, born in Iowa, moved to Elgin, Illinois when he then met his, wife and they got married. So he always took on the Chicago teams, right? It was Bears and Cubs, I remember. And so I rooted for any team that my dad would root for. And I also didn't want to get kicked out of the house. And I just remember growing up as a kid when we first got cable, and WGN would show all the Cubs games. And my dad and I sometimes, if we were able to, and we weren't really doing anything, would sit and watch like a game on TV. I got to go to a game at Wrigley with my dad and some of my relatives. And this was before Wrigley had lights, right? They didn't have lights until 1988. So every game was a day game back in the day. And I just remember these amazing memories. And it was usually around sports that brought us together, and we would just sit there. And that's when we would chat about nothing, and it was such a wonderful time to be with him during, that time when he felt, good and felt, better. I mean, he was always a little, heavy set, but, like I said, things were good back then.
Have you taken your daughter to a Cubs game?
Yeah.
When,
let's see, she was really young, but we, not there in Chicago, but when the Cubs visited here in Arizona playing the Diamondbacks. Yeah, we sure did. That was fun. Yeah.
Good. I always like to see things that are kind of passed down to people's kids from their parents. And you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but with something that we have to talk about, how do you feel like your life has been changed with the death of your dad?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, it's interesting because it's like, especially at the time when it happened, he passed away, my daughter was just born. And so there's this death birth thing going on, right? And maybe, as I look back, maybe being a brand new father was the best thing that could have happened at the time, because you're able to sort of like focus on, I have a child, I have a family, and not really get too, focused on, I just lost my dad, and then going through all of that, those stages of, grief and anger and, whatever that looks like, which are obviously super important to go through all of those as well. But I was able to just sort of like think about other things, I don't know if it would have been different had I not just had a child when my father died, if I would have been in a different place, because again, I was also married. So I had, and friends, had really good support system with family and friends. My mom was still alive, of course, still had both sisters. So, it wasn't as bad, certainly losing a parent is a heavy thing to deal with, but it wasn't as bad, if that makes sense.
Definitely. That's kind of, I know what you mean. Sure. That makes complete sense. And that probably just gave you a whole new basis of being a father, like you said. Like you were probably able to kind of stop and say, okay, this is kind of how like you mentioned before, how I want to be a father, and this is what I want to do. And I love that you passed down the Cubs. Does your daughter still like the Cubs? Or is she a fan?
You know what? I think she's a fan only because I am, if that makes sense, right? She's not a big sports person necessarily, but I think that she likes just the teams that I like, I mean, I don't find myself, talking sports to her, like, hey, did you watch the game last night? Wasn't it amazing? Yeah, because she's not going to know. She doesn't, actively go and watch, sports because, she's got her own thing that she's doing. But, she'll buy me like a Cubs t-shirt, or she just knows that I'm into sports. And so, maybe around like Father's Day, birthday, Christmas, there'll be like a sports related gift.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please consider sharing the show with a friend or rating and reviewing wherever you're listening right now. This will help get the word out about the show, and if one person can be helped by listening to someone's story here, that is amazing. If you would like to share your story with me, you can visit the website at www.backhomemedia.com/parentlesspodcast. You can also email me at parentlesspodcast@gmail.com. Another way to get a hold of me is to find me on Instagram or Facebook, also at Parentless Podcast. And lastly, if you're a phone person, please leave me a voicemail at 623-396-6069. If you love the show and you'd like to help with any special projects that might go on at Parentless Podcast or just be privy to some special extras, go ahead and visit patreon.com/parentlesspodcast. Is there anything, and I don't say this in a way of, do you regret anything or anything like that, but just in general, would there be anything that you would want to say to your dad today if you could?
Oh man. Yeah, that's amazing. Because sometimes I feel like, I could have been a better son. Now, I'm sure my dad would have been like, you were a great son. It's just something that we always feel like we're just not good enough, or we could have been better at something, right? Because I do recall times when I didn't listen, like he was trying to give to me some good advice or an opinion about something, because it's like, trust me, I'm older than you. I've been there. What you are thinking of doing or where I see you going probably isn't the best decision. You know what I mean? And I would just, stubbornness would take over and be like, fuck it, I'll figure it out. And, it doesn't work out. And it's like, oh, I think my dad was trying to tell me something that I should have listened. But, when you're a teenager, you're kind of a knucklehead sometimes, and you do things that later you think back like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that, I wish I would have spent more time with him when he was growing his garden, right? This is something that's kind of amazing to me as I think about, because again, we have this father figure, World War II, tough, didn't show emotion, didn't talk about himself, because he felt like, what am I bringing to the table? Like, I'm not going to talk about myself because I don't want to sound like a braggart. He was big on don't showboat, don't brag about yourself. I remember going back to sports, and it was like, you hit a home run, you win that race, you score the winning goal, but that's what you're supposed to do. So don't get out there and dance and point at the other team and mock them. You did what you're supposed to do. You come back and you sit down. And I remember him saying things like, when you have a wad of cash, you always put your smallest bill on the outside, like you're one, and you put your larger bills on the inside. And I always thought, oh, so that you don't get robbed because somebody would think that you have a lot of money. And he said, that's a good point. But also nobody cares about people that brag. Keep all your shit simple. So this person who was shaped by depression and a hard life and an abusive father and war grew these amazing vegetables and fruit trees. And to me, I'm like, this is a waste of time. I'd rather be inside playing Atari. Why? And this is like Phoenix, it's hot. And he built these gardens that would produce the best tomatoes, I swear, that you've ever eaten, the best carrots, the best corn. And he had this elaborate, drip system, PVC piping, netting, everything that went into it. Because at his soul, at his core being, he was a farmer. He was a gardener. And this was how he loved to spend his time. Maybe this was therapy. It's not laying on a couch talking to someone about, I hated my father and loved my mom type stuff. And I know there's way more into therapy than that. And I'm just simplifying it because that's what my dad would think. I'm not going to sit around and talk about my problems. That's not going to get me anywhere. And now other people know that I have problems. I'm going to, work on growing stuff. And I wish I would have taken the time to better appreciate that, like he would be so happy about his tomatoes, his beefsteak, early girl tomatoes. And I would look at them and roll my eyes and be like, I hate tomatoes. That's such a kick in the fucking nuts, isn't it? Where it's like, I'm trying to pass something on to you and you don't get it. Okay, you're a teenager, so you have other responsibilities. You've got friends and you go out and you drink, but I'm trying to show you something. If you would only take the time to realize that life is about growing stuff. You grow a family. You grow principles and you grow values, but it was, I don't know. Now I look back and I'm like, fuck, I could have learned some amazing shit if I wasn't so self-absorbed.
Right. Yeah. But you know what? You just, at that age, you just aren't able to, like you said, appreciate things, and you just aren't able to. It's just not something that teenagers are thinking about, paying attention to what their parents are doing or trying to tell them. And unfortunately, that's how it is. So now you have that knowledge. Do you try to garden ever?
You know what? That's a really good question. I feel like I have, and now I'm all of 51, and now I'm just really starting to understand. And maybe because it goes back to food, and eating real food. Gardening is such a great way of knowing where your food comes from. And you don't have to worry about, okay, what was it sprayed with? What was it, grown in, And so I feel like I'm now better appreciating the fact of growing food and the fruits of your labor, and then having that risk. Again, it goes back, it comes full circle. You put in some hard work, right? Because as far as I know, there isn't a program yet that you can run a formula and an algorithm to grow plants. You have to actually get out there, dig up some soil, plant it, water it, soil, whatever, talk to it, love it, and then it produces something for you. Now I'm starting to better appreciate that. I think it was always there, under the surface, and it just took a little while for it to come out.
But now it's here.
That's
the circle of life, I think.
It really is. It really is.
Have you been to therapy?
I have not, in the traditional sense of speaking to a therapist. And I say that because traditional sense, because I feel like I have so many things that I do that are therapeutic, right? I'm so lucky in the sense that I have a great wife, great daughter, loving daughter, great friends, loving friends that I've still stay in contact with to this day that I grown up with, grade school or high school, and we still get together and, the text group, kind of thing. We check in on each other, so being able to talk about stuff was always very therapeutic, and, being able to talk to my wife or even my child, we have like an open communication kind of thing where I didn't want to. It's interesting because I'll back up for a moment. My dad never like hit me or showed any sort of physical anything towards me. He broke that cycle. He didn't want to be like his dad who, hit and then asked questions. And again, we're going back to the farm. So, people back then probably would have thought that's not child abuse. That's just growing up. For me, I always wanted to talk, to my daughter and have that open line of communication. And it's okay. We can talk about anything. There's no topic that we can't talk about or that is taboo or, we don't talk about that because it's weird or, you know what I mean? So I would like to think that I broke that cycle. And again, it's very therapeutic to be able to talk to, the people that love you and support you. I'm not taking anything away from therapists. That's an amazing career and job of what they do to help people, especially people that may not have other people to talk to, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And different things work for everybody. And like you mentioned, we do talk about coping mechanisms here. And that's basically, you're telling me you have some good coping mechanisms.
I think so.
your good support system there to help you through. That's great. I like that. So tell me, what do you do now?
Oh, sure. So I recently became a certified health coach through, it was the Dr. Sears Wellness Institute. And I have been a Reiki Master teacher for, I guess a little over a year, maybe a year and a half. So those are things that I like to do sort of on the side, if you will. I mean, if I could do that full time, I certainly would. But it's a way to hopefully help other people by providing energy healing and health coaching. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned this has been in the year and a half, and we all know what's been going on over that time. So sure. Are you all virtual? Do you do in person? What do you do?
That's a great question. So when we had launched our business, it was like then COVID came and the pandemic. And so that really threw a monkey wrench in our vision, in our plans, because obviously we couldn't see people face to face. But Reiki, being this amazing energy that it is, we were able to do virtual sessions, classes, because it is transcendent, I think is the right word that I'm looking for. And so it can be done remotely.
Mm. I really don't have any idea really about, this is something that on my little journey here, I've been wanting to find different coping mechanisms, I guess, or just ways to kind of to deal with things. Mm-hmm. So I guess tell me if somebody signs up for your class or what experience would they get? What does that even mean?
So Reiki is energy healing, and energy comes from source. We like to say source, universal energy. It's whatever you are comfortable with. It could be God, it could be creator, but we always like to say it comes from source or from the universe, because we understand that many individuals may not necessarily be religious and they may not want that connotation with it, because with Reiki is not a religion. You don't have to subscribe to a certain way of, having a certain faith. It's for everyone. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter your background. Everyone can receive Reiki energy. And so what that is in the space of energy healing is that as a Reiki practitioner who has gone through training and who has received the energy from a Reiki master teacher can then provide that to other individuals. And those sessions could be anywhere from a physical ailment that someone is dealing with. It could be stress. Stress is usually the number one reason why someone comes to an energy healer, is that I'm just so stressed out all the time. I can't sleep. I'm not eating well, right? It could be a traumatic experience, PTSD. And so what it does is it allows the body to become relaxed, right? And we're dealing with chakras, and there are 7 main chakras within the body. And it's allowing those chakras that are sort of low or with stuck energy to have good, positive, healing energy come in and get those chakras back to spinning in a, better, more, what's what I'm looking for, efficient way. And so basically it's through our life, we take in a lot of junk. Our body takes in a lot of junk, not just food, right? It's stress. It's dealing with a lot of, it's just life. And so as a Reiki practitioner, it's the good energy, getting rid of that, bad or stuck energy. I'm not trying to use negative, connotations, but, and what it does is it helps the body fully relax so that the body can then jumpstart its own healing mechanism, right? And so a lot of times what we just need to do is just have a good, relaxing, feeling or session. It's almost like, when you go and you get a massage, how you feel afterwards, Now with Reiki, it's not a massage, because with a massage, you have to have a license, right? So we can place hands on a person, on their body, but we're not moving them in the manner that a massage therapist would. We can also place our hands in the aura field of the body, not touching a person, because we understand that a lot of individuals don't want to be touched. They may have sensory issues. We work with individuals who have fibro, and it's that touch, that sensation can be, alarming for them. And also by doing this through a Zoom session or a phone session, the individual will feel it just as much as if they were in the same room.
So are you passing energy along?
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It generally, because when we're dealing with, again, the Reiki energy and we have different chakras, there are chakras that are in the hand, that are in the palms, right? And what I like to envision is that energy from universe is coming down, it's passing through me so that I can deliver it to a person and work on a specific area if they want, like there's someone who is dealing with stomach issues, or they twisted their ankle, or I just have headaches all the time, but the energy is going to go right where it is needed. So someone may say, my knee is really acting up. I'm going to spend time on the knee because I want them to know that I hear them, I'm listening, but there's really there's something else that's going on. Your heart chakra is not working at its most optimal, force. And so I'm going to spend time there, and then that may release that energy, that stuck energy, and then person's knee is going to start feeling better.
That means you must feel other people's energy.
Yeah, sometimes that doesn't happen. It's very interesting. A person may say that they feel it's really hot when we're, placing our hands on a person's body, or just even in their aura. They'll feel a tingling sensation. Sometimes it's pins and needles. Sometimes it's very cooling to them. Everybody has sort of like a different just a different type of experience. As a Reiki practitioner, a lot of times we take that on as well. I remember one time I was working with someone and I kept having to clear my throat. This just kept coming up. And she had said I was just, diagnosed with some sort of throat condition. I didn't know that. I didn't know that person had that, but it's just, it's something that we take on as well.
Are you affected like after you do a session?
Not necessarily, because we always clear ourselves, as a Reiki practitioner. You generally, you clear the space, you clear the room. And when it's virtual, you clear your technology. And then at the end, we do things where we clear ourselves so that we don't keep, right, that other person's energy.
That's interesting. I need to learn more about those type of things. One thing that I didn't ask, is there any smell, sight, taste, sound, anything that reminds you of your dad?
I would say leather, in the sense of leather baseball gloves, right? That makes me think of my dad. Certain things like when you walk into, I remember we used to have these stores that were called Yellow Front. I don't know if people remember those stores, but they were basically like, they sold everything from flip-flops, the kind that lasted a year, to like bicycles, I think, and sort of like fishing gear and camping gear, right? And you could get like your fishing license. I think they sold worms. Anyways, the smell of tire, right? Like if you walk down an aisle of like bicycles and that tire, kind of that rubber has like a distinct odor. When I smell that, I think of my dad. Leather, like baseball gloves, I think of my dad. And when you get inside of a car and you turn on the AC for that very first moment, and maybe you hadn't had to run the AC for quite a while, there's a smell, there's an odor that comes into the cabin, that comes into the car. And for some reason that always makes me think of my dad.
That is super unique. I wonder where that would have come from.
I'm not sure.
Very nice. Do you have any advice to like your younger self? Is there anything that you would like to tell your younger self?
I guess what I would tell my younger self is, take the advice from people that have been there, people that went through those years of whatever struggles that they had gone through. It's like, it's good to, learn for yourself. But if other individuals had made mistakes, along the way, learn from, it's always better to learn from others' mistakes than your own mistakes. But I guess I would just sort of like tell myself, my younger self, just, slow down, like just don't be so wrapped up in yourself, if that makes any kind of sense. Try not to be so self-absorbed all the time. Take into consideration the others that are around you, right? Like what you do has consequences. The consequences can be positive, but sometimes they can be negative. And, don't be afraid to own up to it. Like don't make excuses, don't blame other people. Sometimes we get into a situation where it may have been someone else's doing and now we're having to deal with it as well. But, it's like, don't get ahead of yourself. I guess is what I would tell my younger self. I think what happens is that we sometimes feel like, my friend just got a brand new car. My neighbor just got a brand new car. Why can I not have a brand new car? Why can't I get the stuff that it feels like everyone else around me is getting? Don't worry about all of that. Just focus on what the people that mean the most to you think of you as, right? It's like, who cares if someone you don't know, have never met in your life, thinks about you. That doesn't matter. As long as the people that you care for and that care for you and that you love and that love you, as long as you're doing right by them, that's what matters. It doesn't, don't worry about what everybody else is doing or where they're going. So-and-so is always on vacation when I see them in their IG or their Facebook, and I can never go anywhere because I'm struggling. Who cares? It's just worry about yourself and the people that you take care of and the people that care for you.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Tell me how we can contact you, please.
I can tell you that Twitter is at Birch Healing, and that's the same for Facebook. Instagram is Birch Leaf Healing.
So is Birch Leaf Healing your company name, or what is?
Yes. And then we also have a podcast, which is Wellness Collaborative.
Where can I find that?
That is on Spotify. I don't know. I don't think it's on Apple yet, but Spotify. And
Okay.
that's, my wife and I, and we just talk about, things that are wellness related, we'll talk about, Reiki, of course, and chakras and, what crystals, stones go with each chakra, and then sometimes we talk about our dads or, stuff like that.
Well, yeah, that's the other part. If my guest has a podcast, then I'll totally say, hey, you should go listen to this. And I mean, it's not technically grief related, but kind of, because people come to you, right? If they need grief help.
Yeah.
Many types of help, but grief would be one of them.
My wife is super good with that because she's an end of life doula, right? And
Really?
so if someone is in a space where they're having difficulty because of maybe a loved one or a really good friend just passed, and they're having a hard time dealing with that. Now, of course, there's counselors and there's grief therapists, and everyone should pursue every avenue that works for them. But my wife also has experience with that.
The end of life doula, I haven't looked into those very much, but I think that is maybe a service that many people should look into, because just death in general and these situations, people don't know how to deal with it and nobody talks about it. And from what I've seen of end of life doulas, I mean, that's your person, right? You're there. Does she work with family members or the actual, or everyone? She works with everyone. The person who is dying and the family members.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. She can work with everyone.
Okay.
It's interesting too, because I think you had touched upon it, that death is something that is so difficult for people to talk about, for people to connect with in a way where, what do we do? Because it's interesting. We're all going to die. Everybody knows we're all going to die at some time, but we never talk about it in the sense of, when we do pass on, what does that need to look like? What are we going to do? Who gets what? Where do they want to be either buried or cremated in their ashes? Because unfortunately, someone dies and then everybody is like, oh no, what do we do? They didn't leave a will. We have no idea what they want. I don't know who gets what. If death was talked about openly as much as other types of, emotions, things like, I want to be somewhere in life where I have a goal. I want to do this. I want to have a family. I want to get married. Why shouldn't, when I die, this is what I want also in that frame of conversation? We never talk about it. It's always like, oh, well, let's not talk about that. That's so morbid. Or, well, we've got plenty of time to discuss what's going to happen when I die, but we don't, we don't. I'm not trying to sound scary or anything. I'm just saying that it would be really nice if people thought of what they wanted to have happen to them. And it's okay to talk about death. I mean, we all die, so why not talk about it? Mm-hmm. And I think that, with my wife having that end of life doula, and we're very cognizant of that the afterlife is just right there. Like, I mean, we can't see it, but I mean, I get signs and symbols from my dad and my mom and my sister that passed all the time, and they're just there, and it's usually when I'm thinking about something like my job, or am I doing this correctly, or I'm doubting myself on something and I just need that little extra encouragement, and the hummingbird comes by. My mom loved hummingbirds. And so it's like, cool, thanks, Mom. Or, I see a baseball on the side of the road. Well, that's weird, but it's my dad, like saying, you got this, don't worry about it. We're here, I don't know. Some people can write that off and be like, hey, well, yeah, it's just a baseball. But, if you're open to it, you'll see that you have connections on the other side. They're loved ones. There are people that you may have not even met, but they're in your ancestry, your ancestral, whatever that looks like. And so they're always there, and they're always telling you, like, you got this. We're here to support you.
Mm-hmm. That's a question that I like to talk about. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. And actually what I had written down as you were talking was the signs experience. And then do you ever, like, I guess, spirit wise or anything? Have you ever had anything like that come through?
Oh, sure. I see my dad all the time.
Really?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
When I meditate, we also do things such as what are called journeys, where we can take it's somewhat like a guided meditation, where we can help someone not necessarily get in touch with someone, like, my sister recently passed and I really want to talk to her, or something like that. It's not necessarily like that in the sense of a psychic medium, and we may have a client that is just, maybe they're in a position in life where they find themselves making the same mistakes over and over again. I always feel like I'm in a relationship with someone who doesn't value me, right? I always feel like I can't find the right person, the right, spouse, the right partner. That's what I should say, or it's these things where it's like, I'm always sabotaging myself. Why do I constantly fail at things that I really want to get better at, right? And so you can have a journey that we can give to someone, and it's just really a way of interacting with someone, like I said, like a guided meditation, and we walk them through sort of like a scene, right? And it's pretty amazing what they will get out of it, because a lot of this childhood stuff comes up where it's like, I just now realized that my parents always said that I'm never going to be good at anything. I'm never going to amount to anything. My teachers always told me I'm not smart enough to go to college, but we bury that because either we don't want to deal with it, or it's just, subconsciously that we don't want to deal with. And then you realize, holy shit, I was set up for failure all along. And then you work on that. Now, once you realize what the root problem is, then you work on that and you tell yourself, I am smart enough. Look at everything that I've done thus far. I can do things. My teachers were wrong. I can go to college. I can get a degree. My parents, I love them dearly, but they were wrong. And it's okay. Sometimes it's like my parents could never be wrong. I could never say that. They're my parents. They raised me, but parents are still human. We fuck up all the time.
Well, that is super interesting. All of those things. Anything else that you want to say before we stop recording?
Just, I don't know. It's like, it's been so weird, and I think you had asked me, not this podcast. Let me rephrase that. It's been a really weird couple of years, right? Like, And I think you may have asked me about like, if I had an opportunity to talk to my dad, like, what would I say, things like that. My dad, as simple as he was, and I'm not trying to say that he wasn't smart, but as folksy as he was, he always knew how to talk about any topic. He may not have known a lot about a lot, if that makes sense, about a lot of things, but I could talk to him about, politics, or what do you think about, President so-and-so or so-and-so running for president. And I think he was, Republican, and I was sort of more like Democrat. We didn't see eye to eye on everything, but I really appreciated and understood where he came from and why he thought the way that he thought and why his views were the way that they were. And sometimes I wish that I could talk to him and say, this pandemic or this COVID, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts on it? What's going on? And even though, like I said, he was very simple and hardworking, may not have known all about the science behind it, he would always say something like, it just goes to show that maybe sometimes we get a little too ahead of ourselves and we forget that whatever we create is going to affect a lot of people. And it's just like, holy shit, if we would have thought about that, if we would take the time to understand where people come from and their background and their upbringing, that I think we could find common ground on a lot more stuff that we didn't think that we had.
Phil from Birch Leaf Healing, I have really appreciated our time together, and I thank you so much for coming on. Everyone should also go visit your Instagram account and check out your podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for having me. And I think one thing I did not mention, the website, ReikiSanCarlos.com.
Parentless Podcast is recorded in Phoenix, Arizona. Find us on social media and most major podcast platforms. Music provided by Colin Lococo and the Revolving Birds. Studio and editing provided by Back Home Media and Ian Relaford. Check out one of the many shows on our network. I am your host, Stephanie Relaford.